Good evening. Good to see everyone this evening. We're in the book of Daniel, continuing. We're on chapter 4. This is the life that he made such a big deal about. You got to just tell me. You got to tell me what I dreamed, and you got to tell me what it means. That's what he said in regard to the one in chapter 2. But now we're in chapter 4, and chapter 4 starts out in an interesting way. I want you please to notice this. It appears to me and others that Daniel merely wrote down the record of the words that Nebuchadnezzar himself said. So it looks like Nebuchadnezzar is the one that tells what happened. It's after the fact. And we can tell that by the way he starts the chapter, and then he goes into the difficulties that went on, and then the resolution of the difficulties, and how all that ended. And the end and the beginning of this chapter sound very similar to one another. The middle, not so much. The Assyrian and Babylonian kings regarded themselves as kings of all the earth, and in their inscriptions were accustomed thus to speak of themselves. Now, I want you to notice what he says in verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, to all peoples that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. Now, if you want to do an interesting little short research project in the book of Daniel, you want to see how many times that expression is used, because it's used numerous times in the book to all peoples, nations, and languages in the earth. That is, they portrayed themselves as being over the entire earth. And they were over a good portion of it, being fair about it, and historically speaking, but not really the whole earth. It's just the way they portrayed themselves. So he goes ahead and says, I thought it good to declare the signs and wonders that the Most High God has worked for me. Signs were extraordinary events. Wonders described the effect on the people. So you've got the extraordinary event that happens, and then people wonder at it. We'd say they're awed by it. Something along that order. That's what he's talking about. And then he says, how great are his signs and how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. No other king that ever was on the earth could make this statement, that my kingdom survives from generation to generation to generation. It never stops. Nebuchadnezzar didn't always think that. But by the time he gets through what happens in this chapter, he thinks it. He's got to figure it out, at least that much. Now, was he converted? I don't know the answer to that question. Did he come to fully believe in God? The end of the chapter makes you wonder. It's possible that he did. Edict was prepared under Daniel's influence and has therefore quite some theocratic coloring. So, in other words, Young's saying, I'm not so sure that Nebuchadnezzar wrote this by himself. Daniel was kind of like his speechwriter. That's the way we would say it today, that Daniel did the writing. Well, that may be true because it does have theocratic emphasis, theos. You see, that's really a Greek word, not Hebrew, and it means God. So theocratic is totally unlike democratic. In democratic system, all the people get to vote. In a theocratic system, God's in charge. Now, it's significant that Nebuchadnezzar would write as he does because the people of Israel themselves didn't believe this. They didn't accept the rule of God. Do you remember? If you go back to 1 Samuel chapter 8, that there comes a time when there's a problem. Samuel's getting to be an old man. His sons are not anywhere near what they ought to be. Even by the way, Samuel doesn't think so. And the people reject his sons as Daniel gets old. And what do? Well, look at chapter 8, verse 1 of 1 Samuel. That he made his sons judges over Israel. Named his second Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. But his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain, took bribes, and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "Look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations." Well, of course, really, Samuel takes this as a personal attack. They've rejected me. And he's very, very displeased. Verse 6. Notice verse 7. And the Lord said to Samuel, "Heed the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them." It is most interesting when you take that incident and couple it with the book of Judges, which basically, in terms of a chronological timeline, will be right before this. And you'll see multiple times in the book of Judges, in those days there was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. You see the problem. That carries over now with Samuel being the judge at that particular point in time. Carries over to his day, and they reject the leader. They reject and says, they've been doing this forever. This has been going on ever since we left Egypt. You know, even in Egypt, they had problems with what God had to say. So, any questions or comments? This is setting the stage. Again, I think first 3 verses are what he says at the end of everything that happens, not the beginning. Although it's in the beginning of what he writes here. Okay, let's pick up verse 4 then of Daniel chapter 4. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts on my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Therefore I issued a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers came in. And I told them the dream, but they did not make known to me its interpretation. But at last Daniel came before me. His name is Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God. In him is the spirit of the holy God. And I told him the dream, or I told the dream before him, saying. So now he's beginning to explain, how did I arrive at the point in time where I would say, everybody honor Daniel's God? How did he get there? He certainly wasn't there in chapter 3, was he? When he cast, remember, the 3 young men into the fiery furnace? No, he wasn't there then, but all of a sudden, chapter 4, he is. Now, how much time elapsed between the two? I don't know. No way to know that. But I know God's about to make a singular impression on King Nebuchadnezzar. Notice, the king was at rest, which literally means he was free from all care. What an interesting way to put that. Nothing's bothering me. And then he was also flourishing. Think there about growing green, prosperous. Think about new crops and things like that. That's he's portraying himself that way. He's like a field himself. But he has this dream, and notice The dream troubled him. Literally made me afraid. It indicates the king's whole being was agitated. The word is stronger than the word translated terrified. And by the way, that's in the old King James, because Young wrote his commentary in that era. So he in New King James is troubled, and that's even, to me, milder than terrified. But Young says, no, this word's stronger than terrified. This dream has, what do we say sometimes? Well, it scared me to death. That's kind of what he's saying. It's just really, really disturbing. Young goes on to say, the king recognized that the God of Daniel was different from his own gods. The thought is, that which is truly God is found within Daniel. The epithet holy does not here have reference to moral purity, but is rather roughly equivalent to our word divine. That's a little bit difficult for us. We got to think, where are we in history? Who's doing the talking here? And again, I want you to remember, this section of the book of Daniel is all in Aramaic. So that tells me something very, very important. It's very possible that Nebuchadnezzar at least had it written, because it's his language. It's not the language Daniel will later use when he gets on into chapter 8. All of a sudden he's going to shift back to Hebrew, because from 8 on is written to the Hebrew people, not really encompassing what goes on in Babylon and the Aramaic speaking people. Anybody have any questions thus far? Or thoughts? Oh. Okay, let's go ahead and look at start at verse 9 and listen to what it says. Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, because I know that the Spirit of the Holy God is in you, and no secret troubles you. Explain to me the visions of my dream that I have seen and its interpretation. These were the visions of my head while on my bed. I was looking, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew and became strong. Its height reached to the heavens, and it could be seen to the ends of all the earth. Its leaves were lovely, its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it, and the birds of the heavens dwelt in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it. I saw in the visions of my head while on my bed, and there was a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven. Okay, so he begins with, I saw this tree, and the way he pictures it, it's kind of in the center of the earth. It just dominates everything. It's got branches that reach out, and remember how he thinks about himself. Peoples, nations, languages, all of you, listen to me. That's the way he thought. So as you view this tree, this is a pretty good representation of the way Nebuchadnezzar thought about himself. That he's central, that he's dominant, that everybody's under him. And you can see it in the dream. It follows right along. All the birds, all the animals, the birds, all make their nests in this tree. The animals all come underneath it and feed under it. I already see it. Chris Bates is trying to find out how he can get that tree where he hunts deer. See, all of them feed right there. That's where they are in this image that he's seen. The verbs here indicate not a fixed state, but rather a state of becoming. It's not that it is already there, but it's going there. The tree is growing to encompass the earth. The tree is taken care of over time. All the birds of heaven, all the animals are going to feed there. It has a height that reaches up and out. So, I don't know. What I think of when I read this is well, to some extent, it's the General Sherman tree in the redwood forest in California. The General Sherman, at least at one time, was the biggest plant living on the face of the earth. It's a monster tree. So big that I don't know how many of us it'd take to reach around it. They won't let you walk up to it, by the way, so that's going to be irrelevant. We can't test that. But it's just huge. I remember my sister still has a copy of a picture, because in the days when we went, I remember I'm old, so when we went there, we all joined hands. I took my dad's hand, and then took Laura's hand, and Laura took Lisa's hand, and Lisa held the hand of her stuffed monkey that she liked to play with, and then my mom held the hand of the monkey, and we couldn't even reach around half the tree. That's how big the thing was. So imagine this tree, but it's in its circumference, it's huge this way, but now it also reminds you of what? So it reminds you of the other redwoods that are in California. And those are the ones that skyrocket. They're so big, so tall. That's what he's seeing as he looks at this. And it's in some ways, it's not that amazing that he would be terrified, beyond terrified, because he doesn't know what to think of this. He's feeding, giving shade, giving shelter to the beasts and the birds, and then a watcher. That's difficult translation. Probably the best way to translate would be a constantly vigilant one. Someone that is constantly watching, and he came down from heaven. Does this remind you of any passages of Scripture? Not the story, the watcher idea. Constantly vigilant. Think of anything? What? Ezekiel. Okay, Ezekiel's got, he's called the watchman. But expand beyond that. What about from heaven? Not Ezekiel on earth, but from heaven. It's where the watcher comes from, right? He comes down. So any passages? Come on, Drew, you teach Ecclesiastes.